People in this world who were never meant to be found alone. I learned that the hard way. For a long time, I hid from the world, not in any dramatic way, not in a way most people would even notice. I just disappeared. I've always been deeply introverted, but there was a period in my life when it became something else entirely. My anxiety grew so heavy, so constant, that being around people felt like standing too close to a fire. So I found a solution, a strange one. I started renting isolated cabins in the woods, just for a few days at a time, just long enough to breathe again. No people, no noise, no world pressing in on me from every direction. I know how that sounds, but being alone made me feel safe. One weekend, I rented a cabin about 2 hours from home. Small, quiet, buried in trees, exactly what I needed. The first evening was peaceful. I read by the fire, made something simple to eat, let the silence settle around me like a blanket. The next morning, I went hiking. The woods were beautiful, cold air, the soft sound of my own footsteps on the trail. For a little while, everything was fine. Then I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Twigs snapping, branches shifting. I told myself it was animals. It's always animals out there. Deer, birds, things that scatter when they sense you coming. But these sounds didn't scatter. They followed. Every time I stopped, they stopped. Every time I moved faster, they kept pace. I turned around again and again. Nothing there. Just trees, just shadow, just the feeling of being watched by something that didn't want to be seen. Eventually, the paranoia became too loud to ignore. I cut the hike short and went back to the cabin. That night, I started drinking to quiet my mind. It didn't really work. Around 11 p.m., there was a knock at the front door. I moved to the window, looked out carefully. Nobody there. I told myself it was the wind, old wood settling, the sounds a cabin makes when it's cold and dark and far from everything. Then it happened again. 3 slow knocks, deliberate, patient. I forced myself to look, and this time, someone was standing on the porch. I turned on the light, and what I saw made no sense. A man in a suit, not torn, not muddy, not disheveled in any of the ways a person lost in the woods at night should be. A perfectly clean, perfectly pressed suit, standing in the middle of the forest at 11 o'clock at night, smiling. He spoke calmly, no urgency, no fear. He said he'd gotten separated from his girlfriend, that he needed help. But something was wrong. The kind of wrong you feel before you understand it. His voice carried no panic, no desperation, no emotion at all. He spoke the way someone speaks when they've rehearsed the words, when the words are just a door they're trying to open. I told him I'd call someone. I told him I wasn't letting him inside. And then he said something that made my skin go cold. He told me something was out there, in the woods, and he needed to come inside, to hide. I stepped away to grab my phone, and that's when the door exploded with sound. Bang, bang, bang. Not knocking anymore. Fists, slamming against the wood like he wanted to break through it. I screamed at him to leave. Then he stopped, and I heard something worse than the pounding. Laughter, quiet, calm, amused. I moved toward the window, and I nearly collapsed where I stood. His face was pressed against the glass, eyes wide, smiling, like this was the most natural thing in the world. Then he spoke again, softly this time. "Come on, Victor, open the door." He knew my name. I had never seen this man before in my life, and he knew my name. My hands were shaking when I dialed 911. I stayed on the line. I kept my voice low. I moved away from every window. When the call ended, I looked outside again. He was gone. No sound, no footsteps retreating into the dark. Just gone. Like he'd never been there at all. The police arrived sometime later. 2 officers, flashlights cutting through the trees. They walked the perimeter, checked the tree line, took my statement, and then one of them stopped. He said nothing at first. He just crouched down and looked at something near the ground. Then he stood up and turned. There are some stories that people aren't supposed to know. This is one of them. A few years ago, my life was quietly falling apart. Work was draining me. Bills arrived faster than I could pay them. And the weight of it all was starting to feel permanent. My girlfriend Stacy noticed. She always noticed. So she suggested something simple, something quiet. A cabin. Just the 2 of us, deep in the woods, middle of winter. No noise, no responsibility, no world. It sounded like exactly what we needed. There was only one problem: money. So we did what you do when money is tight and the need is real. We asked for help. My best friend Randy and his girlfriend agreed to split the cost. We found a small cabin, fireplace, forest, silence, and booked it for the end of the month. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. Less than a week before the trip, Randy's girlfriend ended things. Badly. We felt terrible. We offered to refund his share, cancel the whole thing if he needed. But Randy said no. He told us to go, to enjoy ourselves. Then the next day, he called again. He said he'd found someone to bring, someone new. Alarm bells went off the second he said it. Stacy felt it too, that cold, quiet feeling you get when something is wrong but you can't explain why. None of us knew this woman. Randy barely knew her. But after enough convincing, and after Randy offered to cover my entire share of the trip, we said yes. That was our first mistake. Her name was Lucy. The moment we picked them up, I studied her. The way you study something that doesn't quite fit. She seemed harmless enough, quiet, almost shy. The entire drive to the cabin, Stacy and I tried to draw her out. Small talk, questions, laughter. Lucy barely responded. By the time we arrived, I couldn't recall what her voice even sounded like. At first, the weekend was normal. We unpacked, started a fire, settled into the kind of comfortable silence that a good cabin weekend is supposed to have. Stacy pulled out Uno, and for a little while, everything was fine. Then Stacy got down to 1 card. She held it up and said the word, Uno. Lucy's face changed. It happened fast, too fast. One moment she was calm. The next, her expression twisted into something that didn't belong on a human face. She wasn't joking. She started screaming, accusing Stacy of cheating, insisting it was impossible, that no one gets to 1 card that fast, over a card game. Randy tried to calm her down. That only made it worse. Lucy threw her cards across the room and disappeared down the hallway. The 3 of us sat there in silence, not saying a word, not daring to. A few hours later, she walked back out smiling, warm, pleasant, like nothing had happened, like she'd never screamed at all. We told ourselves it was stress, that she was going through something. We made excuses for her. People do that. They make excuses. Then came dinner, and that's when things shifted again. Without warning, without any prompt at all, Lucy began sharing things, deeply personal things, about her and Randy, details no one at that table needed to hear, details that made Randy sink lower and lower into his chair, his face burning red. I tried to change the subject, cracked jokes, talked over her. Eventually, she went quiet. But something had changed in the air of that cabin, something that wouldn't go away. That night, Stacy shook me awake. "Listen," she whispered. I sat up in the dark, and I heard it. Muffled voices from down the hallway, low and angry. Too low to make out words, but the emotion was clear. Something was very wrong. We said nothing the next morning. Randy barely spoke. Lucy barely left the bedroom. The day passed like a held breath. And then came the second night. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I am not someone who scares easily. But what Randy told me in the early hours of that morning turned my blood cold. He was standing over us in the dark. He'd knocked quietly, barely a sound, but the fear on his face lit up the moment I opened the door. He asked if he could stay in our room. Then he asked us to lock the door. He told us he'd woken up to find Lucy standing at the foot of the bed, not moving, not speaking, just watching him sleep. When he asked what she was doing, she turned to look at him slowly, and she said, "I'm watching you sleep." Some places hold on to the dead, long after the living have moved on. I learned that the moment I stepped through the door. My father and I were never close. The kind of distance between us wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment, no great falling out. It was just always there. A quiet gap that neither of us ever figured out how to cross. He died about 6 months before any of this happened, and when the dust settled, I inherited his cabin. An old place, buried in the woods, the kind of building that looked like it had been slowly swallowed by the trees around it. Before I sold it, and I always knew I would sell it, I decided to spend one last weekend there. Not out of love exactly, more like a goodbye, the kind you give to something you never fully understood. The moment I stepped inside, I smelled death. Not a metaphor. The cabin reeked of rot and staleness and something I couldn't quite name. Something that had been festering in a closed space for a very long time. The place was filthy and frozen. Everything exactly as my father had left it. Same furniture, same bookshelves lining the walls, same disgusting couches I remembered hating as a child. Like time had simply stopped. Like the cabin had been waiting for someone to come back. I started cleaning, and that's when I first heard it. Movement above me. Soft at first, easy to dismiss. Then I remembered the attic. I told myself it was animals, raccoons, squirrels, something that had found its way in through the eaves while the place sat empty. I pulled down the ladder and climbed up. It wasn't animals. The attic was covered in trash, food wrappers, empty beer cans, rotting garbage piled in the corners like someone had been making themselves comfortable up there for a very long time. The smell hit me like a wall. I told myself an animal had dragged things up there. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. I climbed back down, closed the hatch, and tried to put it out of my mind. That night, I went to sleep exhausted, the kind of tired that pulls you under fast. But sometime after midnight, I woke up. The sounds were back, only this time they were different, heavier, slower, the kind of sounds that don't belong to small things. I lay there in the dark, listening, telling myself I was imagining it. Then I got up. When I stepped into the hallway, I stopped. The attic ladder was hanging down, open. I was certain I had closed it. I stood there staring at it for a long moment. Then I looked down at the floor. A fresh food wrapper, sitting right there at my feet. I picked it up. My jaw was tight. I was annoyed. At what exactly, I wasn't sure. I walked into the living room, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, beside the old recliner, a blanket, bundled up on the floor, covering something large. At first, I thought nothing of it. Clutter, junk, the mess of a man who had stopped caring about his surroundings. Then I saw the boot, sticking out from beneath the edge of the blanket, dark, worn, still. I couldn't move. I stood there in that dark living room, staring at a boot attached to something I couldn't see, trying to convince myself there was an explanation. Then the blanket moved, slowly, rising, falling, rising, falling. Someone was breathing underneath it. Everything I had heard that day rushed back to me at once. The footsteps above me, the open attic hatch, the food wrappers, the smell. None of it had been animals. There was a person in that cabin, living in the attic. How long they'd been there, I couldn't know. But judging by what I'd seen up there, it had been a long time. I didn't speak. I didn't run. I moved backwards through that room as slowly and carefully as I could. One step, then another, keeping my eyes on the blanket the entire time. I reached the door, grabbed my keys, grabbed my phone, and I ran. I backed my car down the driveway as fast as I dared, and in my headlights, I saw him. A man standing on the porch, filthy, hollow-eyed, still, just standing there, watching me leave, not chasing, not calling out, just watching. The police told me later that it wasn't uncommon. A cabin sits empty long enough, someone moves in.